of any group of dinosaurs. They really started at about 90 million years ago and ended at 65. So, within that span of 25 million years, we get all of the evolution of all the horned dinosaurs, and they're changing more rapidly than any of the other dinosaurs. So, I think that dinosaurs can tell us a lot about how evolution works, especially when we look at these animals which were hugely successful for a very large amount of time. I didn't think I would have much time to talk about tyrannosaurs, but it's also interesting that tyrannosaurs undergo the same sorts of patterns as the ceratopsians, in which we have some animals in the south which are different from some animals in the north, and they're rapidly evolving along that western strip of North America. All of these animals in yellow are the actual true tyrannosaurs. So the true ancestors of T-Rex, of course all these other guys are related, but the true ancestors of T-Rex only lived in western North America, on that island continent of Claramidia. And their record goes from 80 million years ago all the way up to 65. So within, between 80 million years ago, this animal that lived with Diabloceratops and T-Rex, we have 15 million years in which the whole history of the real big tyrannosaurs evolved. Tyrannosaurs were big, but it wasn't until they evolved on western North America that they got to be truly gigantic, the size of T-Rex. And T-Rex didn't get to be big until western North America reunited with eastern North America. And that's all I have. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Good, thank you, Dr. Lowland.
Go ahead.
Would these dinosaurs interbreed, like to cause other types of dinosaurs with different DNA?
As far as we know, no. Once again, how do you prove interbreeding? When you say did they interbreed, did a crested hadrosaur interbreed with a non-crested hadrosaur? Probably not. These animals are different enough that they recognize that they're not the same. But even if they did, we would never record it. So it's not like we have two groups that are evolving independently, and then all of a sudden the group is all mixed together. We never have that. So I would say probably not. There's enough behavioral things with species recognition, recognizing that that's not something I want to mate with, that, it probably didn't happen. But similar species, the thing is, when you think about how evolution works, as paleontologists, we tend to think of evolution as not something that's happening all the time. Evolution is a special thing that happens when something in the environment is stressed, and generally it's on a small population that's isolated from the rest of the population. That small population is more suspect to change in gene frequency. That population will change. When that population, if it ever gets back to population A, maybe it recognizes population A as its friends and it all goes back and there's really no speciation. Or it doesn't like them and then it outcompetes them and one wins. We almost never have two sister taxa living at the same place. So I also work on Allosaurus. We have 3 valid species of Allosaurus in the entire world. But those 3 species, one of them lives in Portugal, which was Georgia at the time. The other 2 live here in Utah. But the 2 that live in Utah do not live at the same place in the same time. One of them lives first, and then it's replaced by the other one. So if you would have them in the same place, it would be problematic. Because, think about Africa. How many species of elephants do you have in Africa living in the same spot at the same time? Right. Same spot at the same time, there's one. And so, if you do the same thing, you're probably not going to live alongside another species that does the same thing. It's a long answer to it.
So how do you how do they actually evolve or change? Does it just like when they adapt to the they change to adapt to the situation they're in, right?
Well,
so like how do they actually do that? They're just like genetics just decide, oh, I need to change to this environment.
so within ceratopsians and sexual selection, we use that as a basis. So this entire room is a group of centrosaurs. That's the population of centrosaurs at any given one given time. Now probably there's on the order of 20,000. You know, that's the basic lowest level of a population that can be sustainable through time of an animal that big. You know, then you can argue about warm-blooded, cold-blooded, how much food it eats, productivity. Let's just say 20,000 animals. If you take 100 animals, isolate them in a valley that's cut off from the rest of the population, let's say maybe the seacoast comes up to the cliffs and they can't get over to the rest of them, that population may have a different mix of different expressions of their horns. So there may be 3 or 4 animals in there that have a forward curving horn. The possibility of that getting passed on within that small population is much higher. So we tend to think of small populations being necessary for change, because those 3 or 4 weird curved horn morphs are going to get totally muted out in the larger population. It's only in that small isolated population in which you can express that freak of nature. And then that's selected for by maybe mate preference. You know, maybe there's a weird female who thinks that that's really cool, and that gets, you know, give it a few hundred years, all of a sudden you have a new population. When those animals, if they ever meet up with Centrosaurus, they're basically still Centrosaurus, right? They're Centrosaurus with curvy horns. But it's that behavioral mate selection, mate preference thing that's going on that's going to not let them be subsumed back into the rest of the straight-horned Centrosaurus. And so then the 2 populations will go on an arms race because they both eat the same plants, do the same thing for a living, and only one of them is going to win. So give it 1,000 years, all of a sudden you have curved horn guys. That's the way we think of it. But of course, geologically, can't prove that. You have to have that happening in a lake with barbs. And it's just not going to work with ceratopsians.
In class, on the last day, you talked about how devastating that final event was that brought on the Great Extinction. If it was so devastating, how did so many mammals and birds survive? Why wasn't everything on Earth wiped out?
Well, that's just it. They didn't. So when we think about the things that survived were a few mammals, very few. Like 10% of all the different mammals that were alive only made it through. 2 or 3% of the birds made it through. It wasn't like it was all of the birds, all of the mammals. It was a few of the birds, a few of the mammals. And we know from past extinctions, like say with ammonites, which is basically a squid living inside of a snail shell, kind of like a chambered nautilus. They almost went extinct at the Permian, but they made it through and they made it all the way to the end of the Cretaceous. So it's just these bottlenecks, and just a few things are lucky, and the lucky things that are left get to inherit the earth and become us. I think you were next.
Is there any thought as to some sexual dimorphism with these? Like, is there a way to identify males and females, or could some of these be like one species that we have recognized as a species just be a male or female version of something?
Right. So this is one of the main criticisms for the sexual selection within horned dinosaurs, or dinosaurs in general. The people who are against it say that you can't have sexual selection without